Sweet. All right, welcome to Atheist Talk. I'm Madeline Love, and this episode is being 2020 in gorgeous Eagan, Minnesota. The conversation today is with virologist Dr. Richard Allen Wjhite III. He is a virologist and CEO of Raw Molecular Systems, LLC, and is going to focus on COVID-19. While we just had a conversation about COVID-19 last month, we here at Atheist Talk felt there has been so much change on this topic in the last 6 weeks that another conversation would be useful and informative. I want to provide a content warning for this episode. This conversation will feature a frank discussion around this issue. There may be details about those who suffer from this illness that some listeners might find difficult to listen to. We are not trying to be either sensational or hyperbolic. Rather, we want to have an open, honest, and frank discussion on this issue. And unfortunately, there are aspects of this topic that can be very difficult to hear and think about. So, Dr. Richard, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, great. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's, I mentioned we just had a conversation with, I think, Dr. Vincent Racaniola of This Week in Virology a month ago. And I felt like, we did a really great show. And we hit a lot of information, and it feels like everything we talked about 6 weeks ago with him, like, it's still valid, but so much has changed, and we've learned so much more just in the last 6 weeks. And
Absolutely.
So I'm so happy that you said that you'd come on and chat with us. So I guess before we get into the COVID discussion, what is it about microbiology and virology that prompted you to get into this field of study?
Oh, this is a great question. So I've always been interested in the natural world. My father was a paraplegic, and so I was in and out of hospitals most of my life. My uncle is a surgeon and head surgeon at Stanford Medical Center. So medicine has been a part of my life for a long time. I grew up rural, so I grew up on a ranch, and I was exposed to like all these different critters and animals and stuff like this. And so I've always been interested in the natural world. And for me, I've always, I grew up watching, the Outbreak movie and, stuff like that. And so the minute I saw that movie, I thought, wow, that would be so cool. And the viruses seduced me for the first time. And then finally I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And then I took my first course in cellular molecular biology when I was an undergraduate, almost 2 decades ago. Dates me a lot. And the woman at the end of her lecture, normally we don't talk a lot about viruses. And she said, I want to talk to you about the unfilterable agents and obligate intracellular parasites known as viruses. And that was it for me. I had been stuck, stolen, everything had been given away to these amazing nanomolecular machines.
It's so cool to hear. And I hear many virologists talking about this, how this world opens up of the invisible. And that before is like, not for everybody, for many people, is like, you really don't comprehend like how many viruses are there, how different they are, how varied this entire, I don't know if ecosystem is the right word, life system, like everything that's there. It's like a different universe almost.
So, I mean, this is a great comment on this. And so, I also, as a kid growing up, I watched Cosmos, and I was fascinated with the cosmos. And then Lynn Margulis, his first wife, wrote the idea of microcosmos, the idea of looking at the small stuff. And there are more viruses in the ocean than there are observable stars in the observable universe, right? So we think there's 10 to the 31 viruses total, 10 to the 30 in the ocean. There's probably much more than 10 to the 31. There's only 10 to the 21 stars in the observable universe. So you've got upwards of 9 to 10 of the order. It's a lot. A mole of molecules, right? A mole of elements, right? Is 6 times 2 times 10 to the 23rd, right? So it's even more viruses than that. So we're talking about an abundance that is absolutely tremendous. They're the largest genetic reservoir. They're the greatest creators of the greatest library of genes. A virus isn't going to keep a gene around if it doesn't function, right? And some viruses in the ocean, they steal parts of photosynthetic apparatus, or they steal cobalamin synthesis or phosphorus phosphorus scavenging. And we're just, with the advent of next-gen sequencing, and we're able to actually look at this. Craig Venter went out in the Sargasso Sea, and they said that the Sargasso Sea was dead. There's nothing there. And there's a tremendous diversity. And now we're starting to get in terrestrial ecosystems, like looking at plants, looking at our gut. You have more viruses in your mouth in an average person than you have stars in the Milky Way galaxy. You have more you have more viruses in your gut that are living in your lower your immune system. And 70% of your gut of your immune system is from your gut. And there's more stars obviously in the Andromeda galaxy, and you have more viruses in your gut than you have stars in the Andromeda galaxy. So I mean, it's an abundance that is just absolutely tremendous. And when we look at what we're dealing with now, we're dealing with a global change in climate. We're dealing with antibiotic resistance, the monster that is asleep. We are dealing with a viral epidemic, one that we haven't seen at this magnitude in the last 100 years. And we're dealing with things that are absolutely terrifying. And I think, and I will hopefully convince you tonight, that phage are our answer. The viruses that infect bacteria have led to tremendous advancements, such as next-gen sequencing, molecular cloning, CRISPR-Cas, gene editing. All of this came from phage, viruses that infect bacteria. And so, and that's why we work at it at RMS. We think that phage 1.0 was cloning, sequencing, vectoring, all these different things. We think phage 2.0 may be, devices made from phage, batteries made from phage, cars made from phage, treating antibiotic resistance. We think that the next generation and tremendous amounts of green jobs will be generated from understanding and using the phage 2.0.
When I was in college, one of my public speaking classes, I had to convince everybody, and I chose this topic because I'm a nerd, that the Doctor from Doctor Who is real. And one of my talking points was how there are more stars in the sky than there are grains of sand on the planet Earth. And to hear that there's more viruses in the ocean than stars in the sky, and then just that for me, it's hard for me to comprehend such a big
order of magnitude, not just a little bit more,
right.
Orders of magnitude.
Right. And
if you line them end to end, they would reach 60 galaxies away.
That is just mind-boggling. Oh yeah, that's.
And we don't even know 99. We don't know 90% of the genes.
Yeah, I remember watching something on. This was PCR from 10 years ago, so I know things have changed. But they were talking about, you'd sequence gut bacteria, just the genes in your respiratory tract, and there was this big black space where we know these are genes, we have no idea what they are. We have no idea what they code for. We don't know. We know they're part. They're there. No idea. And I just love that.
And the other thing is you have a whole nother genome. You're your own ecosystem. You have an ecosystem in your mouth. You have an ecosystem on your skin. You have an ecosystem in your genital tract. You have an ecosystem everywhere on you, and you interact with an ecosystem, right? And so this is the whole idea of the microbiome, right? Is that this is a whole other thing that might be easier to manipulate and easier to because if it's as simple as giving something to your diet or changing your diet or adding this bug back in, it might be much easier than trying to edit your genome directly, right? I mean, even with the advent of CRISPR-Cas and all these other things, it's hard to change a whole organism.
What advice would you give to somebody, and maybe it's what you've just been talking about, but what advice would you give to somebody, say in middle school, in high school, who's they're living through this, through what will be history right now? I mean, this is life-changing global history that we're living through. What advice would you give to that student who's thinking, maybe I want to learn and study more about viruses?
I think, in the field we're seeing right now is that we don't have enough infectious disease experts. We don't have enough, companies building, basic stuff. I think that, the next, Einstein or Newton is sitting in a classroom somewhere, and they're going to invent a technology that's going to change everything. right? And for me, as an entrepreneur and a lecturer at the university, my thing is that we have to, I think, tackle two things. I think we have to tackle this virus, but I think the thing that is more terrifying for me is the misinformation. And so that's why I started this, my friendly neighborhood virologist type of group on YouTube and stuff like this, is that the misinformation, because we are so connected, it's created another problem. And so we're fighting this pandemic, and then we're also fighting misinformation. And the misinformation has been weaponized by various things to cause problems. And so it's a two-edged sword. So I think not only we need people to study viruses as far as biological viruses, but misinformation acts like a virus. So you could be computational or security and apply what we know about viruses to something like that. And so viruses, I've always thought and believed that viruses are the greatest teachers of how to deal with many parts of our world. I mean, I make the joke because I'm a Star Wars nut, geek, I guess, not a nut, but is that, they're really the midichlorians, if you would. The Force talks about, the force that guides everything, right? And so these are viruses. They're they go through, and they are the largest changing of biomass. They lyse 20% of the ocean every day. They're the greatest reservoir of genes, right? And so by understanding viruses, we understand global geochemical cycles from phosphorus, nitrogen, carbon, how our oceans and our terrestrial biosphere breathes could be potentially a viral component of that. So I think, beyond just preventing infectious disease, applying them in technologies, which we've done in the past, and then also just being able to understand how they function in soil, right? For bigger things like climate change, for example.
You brought up your friendly, could you repeat that? I know I'm on the page.
Friendly neighborhood virologist. Yes.
Yeah. So I was invited to that by fellow skeptic and podcaster Nathan Dickey, who, he's just a good friend. And I was drawn to it. One of the things that drew me to it was like, okay, I think whoever created this page is a bit of a nerd, and like Spider-Man. I don't know if that was in your head when you created it, but that's what I got out of the title.
It was, I guess, I guess, I am a huge fan of comics. When I've grown up, I read a lot of comics. So I'm more of I think Venom is kind of a cool villain. He's the villain, but he acts like the symbiote acts like a virus. So I was drawn to Venom more than Spider-Man myself. Yeah. But, even his powers are, it was from infection. So I guess,
Well, and to be clear, when I say nerd, I do not mean that in any kind of derogatory.
Oh no, I it's a term of endearment for me.
Okay, good. We're on the same page there.
I mean, you look at who are the biggest billionaires, Bezos, and they're 20, 30 years ago, they would have been the kid, being made fun of. So yeah. That's a term of endearment for me.
Well, and I'm really grateful for the page you created.
Thank you.
It's full of science. It's full of scientific skepticism. Politics really aren't welcome there. Natural remedies aren't really welcome there. No. You do it good. Anti-vaxxers aren't welcome there. Thank goodness.
Absolutely not.
I like how you're trying to create a space where we can have conversations and answers. We can talk to you and we can talk to other MDs and PhDs. And we can ask questions and get answers in a very one-to-one, real, personal way, with at least less, maybe not devoid, but less bias and hocus pocus and misinformation and disinformation, as you were talking about earlier. What was it that prompted you to decide that you wanted to create an online community of like around YouTube and social media?
I think for me, it's just that I'm beyond a scientist, and a lot of the stuff that I do is we publish, we try to write grants, but we do a really horrendous job in getting that to the public. And I think that not only do we not communicate it as well as we could, some do better than others. I love watching Neil deGrasse, for example. So but trying to remove the partisanship and the politics from science. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and scientists were, we've lost the idea of experts, that experts matter, and that in a democracy, everyone has an opinion, and that's great to have an opinion. But it's part of healthy democracy. Going back to Plato and Socrates, they talked about this, right? I've read a lot more of existential literature lately, and going back to my old Plato and the Republic, and reading about what he said, 3,000 years ago, and what they thought, and so for me, I wanted to deal with it twofold, right? I wanted to deal with actually combating the virus directly, but also the misinformation, because we don't have strong leadership. And that's not only a problem for the United States, it's for a lot of different countries. There's only a handful that have a strong enough leadership that have been able to go in and say, look, we're going to test robustly. We're going to get people, we're going to quarantine people, and we're going to use our funds correctly to help the day-to-day persons. And and I commend places like New Zealand and South Korea and Iceland, who've done a fantastic job of testing their people. And it was official that that New Zealand, there's no more cases. So and we could have done this. And it's for me, it's the greatest American tragedy. We've lost 63,000 Americans in a matter of 102 days. That's more people that have died from this virus than people that died in 15 to 20 years of Vietnam. More people that died with this virus than the Korean War. More people that have died from this virus than World War I. And more people have died from this virus than all the years in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. In Afghanistan, we've been there, God knows how long, since 9/11. So 19 years. There are kids growing up today. My own daughter doesn't know a world without us being in Afghanistan. There are kids that are dying today in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in Syria and these places that don't even know why we're there. And not to get too politics, and I try to make my page a place about politics, but these are the facts. And that, we lost more Americans yesterday than we've lost in all of the time in Afghanistan in one day. So when you hear things that this is just like the flu, that this is just like cancer, or this is that, more Americans are dying from this than any other disease right now. And it's not a giant conspiracy it is not as well, it's not a thing that people are adding, there's this thing about, well, we mark it down as COVID, we get more money. People are dying. People are dying in the ambulance before they even get to the hospital. They are dying in the waiting rooms. They are dying in there. And our healthcare of people are dying because of lack of PPE. They are wearing used smocks and stuff from baseball games. We don't have enough masks for them. We don't have enough ventilators. We're not testing enough. And it is the sum of all my fears that we open this up again, and without having our stay-at-home options, without testing, and that this will double, triple. Personally, as a virologist and as a human being, a compassionate human being, I can't sleep very well because, it's not just about the old or the sick and this kind of thing. These are people that are just like you and me, like anyone. Even animals are getting sick for this. Tigers and cats and dogs. I mean, this is, and instead of viewing it as a partisan issue of it's this or that and the other, it has to be about, this is a person. This is a person that has value, that has dignity, that has a right to clean air and clean water and a right to exist. And we're Americans, like this is what we were founded on, you know? And that's why I started the page, because was so many people over the last 6 weeks that were like, Rick, some random person I haven't seen in 20, 30 years, since high school, right? Or grade school. And they're like, Rick, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I have not worked directly on these viruses. I've worked on the big three. I've worked on flu. I've worked on HIV. I've worked on Hep C. I've worked on human Peggy-virus G. I mean, some of these are retroviruses, positive sense strand viruses, and I've worked on phage forever. So, and viruses that don't even have names yet, and they infect random bacteria or random fungi. But, at the end of the day, all I know is my training from graduate school and my training from that and my years of working with an interest in viruses, reading these papers. And I just said to myself, well, I can't continue to, comment on other people's stuff. I'm going to start my own thing. I wanted to do my own YouTube channel. I'm doing a lot of things, and I'm not a video editor yet, so I'm working on that. So I'm learning, as a scientist, you try to learn everything, and, you're good at certain things, but, I haven't done a lot of media and broadcasting and editing yet. So I'm working on that. So I said, finally, after this one group was like, well, I don't want to hear this information, that people are dying. And they kicked me out of their group. I said, man, I got to do something. So I started this, Your Friendly Neighborhood Virologist. It is a pun off Spider-Man. And, and I thought of it as this way. It's like, back, 100 years ago, there was a town doctor, right? In rural, we were more rural. We had communities, and, you could go to, Jimbo at the old corner, and he would, it wouldn't always be the best information, obviously. Because even 150 years ago, or 170 years ago, the dentist and the barber and the guy who did the horseshoeing was also the doctor, right? So I'm not quite there, but I think for me it was thinking about the community that people have, and we're living more in cities now. We're not owning homes much anymore, but being able to go, well, I don't know what's the right answer. What is the right answer? And we don't even try to say what's the right answer. We just say, here is the current peer-reviewed or preprint information. And if you have a question, we'll do the best we can. And we're going to have, PhDs and MDs that are experts in a variety of different sciences trying to say, look, this is what we know. This is what we don't know, and this thing is evolving fast, the misinformation is evolving faster than we can keep up with it. But just a place that, like, it, I don't care if you're, blue or red or green or polka dot with your politics.
Right.
I don't care. I want you to be safe at the bottom end of the line, and I want your family to be safe. And I want you to not die from this. So, that's why I did it. As well, with my company, we are trying actively to get funding to go after this virus directly. So, and testing and these kind of things as well. So for me, it's a different time, and it's a different universe. And I hope that it changes us in a positive manner. I hope we take steps to know that, we can't wait on these kind of things, that we have to be thinking about them all the time, and we need to invest broadly in science, and we have to train more scientists, and we need people in power that have scientific literacy. I think that should be a requirement. If you don't have it, I'm sorry, you can't lead people correctly.
Right. I feel like I think you're okay as long as you have somebody you can trust, that you're going to rely on, believe. And like, if you have, regardless of who's the current political leader,
Right.
if you're turning to say somebody like Dr. Fauci, and you're saying you're going to be instrumental in guiding this policy, and I'm going to listen to you, because, no matter what gets thrown at a president or somebody in power, there's always a chance it's going to be outside of their expertise.
Right.
If you feel a good leader surrounds himself with experts, turns to them, listens to them, believes them, Minnesota Atheist is a 501c3 tax organization. We cannot endorse or attack politics, only policy. But I don't feel like the current policies are doing much to help
No,
our health.
I would say, as a citizen and not a representative of my company or my university, I would say no.
Yeah. Well, and
I would say that we should be, there's been estimated of about $100 billion to test people, and we need to hire about 100,000 people for case trackers. That creates tremendous amounts of jobs. We have 30 million people out of work right now. We could declare a defense act that would allow us to switch to making ventilators, and we could get better PPE in place so we don't have to close the meat plants down. And I mean, politics aside, I going back to your question about a middle schooler and grade schooler, I don't know if I answered that effectively or not, but science is getting cut, music is getting cut, PE is getting cut. Our basic education is getting cut. So when I say basic scientific literacy, it starts at age 2 or 3, that the earth isn't flat, that and that has been known for almost 2,000 years or 3,000 years. I mean, it was an Egyptian who figured this out. And that, the natural world matters, and that we should live with it and not against it. And that you should understand the basics, of science, that, we are made of DNA, these type of things. And that, we've come a long way, but I think with the rise of these devices that have connected us all, it's created other problems. And so for me, I think we have to have great education and better forms of education, and remodel our forms of education. That includes graduate school and that type of things as well. A new way to educate our kids coming up, and then have an emphasis on science and math and engineering and stuff like this. And be able to also not only do that, not only generally educate them, but also to educate them at a lower cost, and then and for jobs that exist now, not 100 years ago.
Right.
So,
I'm sorry. I was thinking when I was thinking about this interview, I was going to have you explain like why we should take this so seriously. And as we've been talking, and you've listed the deaths and how serious it is, I just feel like this is a silly question. I'm not going to ask that question. But
well, I guess we could compare it to flu versus, that's
yes.
the big one. Everyone I get lately it's just like flu. It's just like the seasonal flu. Okay. This is not like the seasonal flu at all. This has a higher R naught, so infectious rate.
Can you stop there for just a moment?
Sure.
And describe, because I feel like because I've been listening and consuming, and then with my microbiology background, I understand what R naught is. And I feel like that's a term that gets used a lot and more in the general, like in mass media.
Right.
But I don't know how many people, I think people think they know what R naught means.
Right.
But I don't know how many people know what R naught means. Could you just take a moment to describe what that is?
Yes, the R naught is the basic replication unit of a virus. So it's the replication number. So it's a way an epidemiologist tells spread. So if I have an R naught of 10 for measles, for example, I will on average infect 10 people. It's that simple. For an R naught of 3, on average, I will infect 3 people, right? In the first round, right? But then everything is exponential. Then that 3 would do 3 and 3 and 3 and 3 and 3 and 3, right? So it's just a basic replication unit that we use in epidemiology and virology and bacteriology, or any pathogen for that matter, to get at how many infections will they generate, right? So we get a lot of false information about how it's just not as bad, and there's anywhere from 24 to 61,000 deaths from flu. And I initially I was like, it can't be as bad. It's not a big deal. It's not as bad as flu. I admit to that. But we did not know what we were dealing with. That's clear. These viruses are 30% of all common colds come from coronaviruses. The other 50% come from rhinoviruses. So you have mild symptoms, mild cold, flu-like symptoms, and they go away. We don't know a lot about these viruses, and there's 6 other human coronaviruses that cause the common cold. They make you feel awful for a couple of days, but they don't go on. And so there's been no emphasis in pharma or research to really work on them. And even lecturing about coronaviruses prior to SARS, it was just a 1 page. It causes the common cold. Next, it's 1 slide. Even when I was an undergraduate, and then SARS hit in 2003, 2004, and 778 people died globally. And we closed it quick enough with that virus because it wasn't as catchy as this other virus, right? It wasn't able to spread so well. This new COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 has a tremendous ability to spread, both on contact, both from droplets that are in the air, sneezes, coughing, and in the acute phase, first 72 hours to 96 hours of infection, you may not feel any different. You may feel a little hot, maybe feverish, but then and then a lot of people, they don't progress to more systemic disease. But then some do, and then what happens is that the virus replicates in the lower respiratory tract, and it starts killing cells rapidly, and then fluids leak, and then they can't breathe, and so that's why they have to have an artificial respiratory stuff, ventilators. And mainly the reason for that is that the immune system, in trying to overtake the virus, neutrophils, right? So it's not the classical cytokine storm that we hear about with flu. It's more neutrophils coming in and kind of doing a scorched earth type of approach, where they're going in and they're killing healthy and normal cells. And all that fluid builds up. And so people can't breathe, and so they need to be on ventilation. And, we don't really have a good number, and we may never know the true number because we haven't tested people at the beginning and after the outbreak. But what we need is whole populations. My state of Idaho, we have 1.7 million people. We should be able to test 1.7 million people, both, for using quantitative PCR, which directly detects the virus, and then some sort of antibody test that allows us to whether you had it or not. Now, we're seeing with these detections using PCR, a lot of people are saying, well, people are recovering, and then they're still showing up positive. And so that seems to be, at least this kind of anecdotal information, I'd have to see a public peer-reviewed paper, that it might be bits of the virus, or either that or false positives, but the virus is not active. But we need testing. We need an antibody test in order to figure out at least if you've had presence or contact with it. And then we need, then we need to be able to say, okay, me, Rick, I'm infected, and, and my wife and daughter are here, and we'll quarantine. And then all the people that I've talked to, they stay in quarantine until I'm better or I die. So, and then, they don't get it. They go another 14 days and they don't get it. And then that we hear a lot about flattening the curve, right? And there's a historical perspective to that. And so this isn't our first rodeo. We had a rodeo in 1918 in Philadelphia and St. Louis. Philadelphia had this idea, well, we're still going to have a parade for financial goal and to gain finances and stuff like this in 1918. And so they opened up this giant, it was like a parade where lots of people were contacting, there wasn't a lot of social distancing, and where St. Louis said, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to close it down and see what happens. And so they had a huge, tremendous spike. So part of the area of the curve kind of went like this, went straight up and then crashed, right? It's more acute, right? And the cases end quicker, but more people die because the system is overwhelmed. It's like a clog in a drain. It can't do them all, so people die. Where St. Louis just kept it kind of, we're just going to isolate and to let it go. And then if there are cases, we can treat them because we're not overwhelmed. The other thing with the way that medicine is ran in the United States is that there's no financial benefit for most hospitals to have more ventilators or have more beds, right? It gets into cost issues, right? So you may only have, in a hospital, you may only have 15 beds because that's the maximum amount of bed that they're compared to. But when you have 2,000 people that need ventilators, the death rates just skyrocket.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, I don't know what part of Idaho you're in, but I spent 20 years working in a small community hospital. And it was a quote unquote 50-bed hospital, which meant we had like 20 actual patient beds for, taking care of people long term. And yeah, the town was 30,000 people, and those 20 beds was just fine normally. Yeah. But if this ravages through that town of 30,000 people, there's those 20 beds, and like maybe one of them is a negative pressure room, but you can't take care of that. So when I hear you talking about, the curve and flattening the curve so we can take care of people and the clog and the drain, it's like, yeah, that town and towns like it need to make sure that they limit the number of people who are sick at any one time. Like,
right.
It's gonna go through the whole population eventually, but let's let it get there. So one of the analogies that actually, my favorite analogy that I've heard was, you can ask somebody to drink 5 gallons of water in a month. That's easy. But you ask somebody to drink 5 gallons of water in a day, that's difficult, and it might kill you.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
So this is kind of the same idea. And go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention another thing that is another thing that's bothering me. Is when I the lack of PPE is one thing, and we should be able to. In a perfect world, we'd be able to make N95 masks for everybody, and N99 even better, because even with N95s, there's still 5% get through, right? So, but what I don't understand is even with my wife and I've been making a lot of masks for people, and then of course I might even put this on the website to say, look, if you need a mask, we'll send you one as long as you pay for shipping. Because we have to wear masks. We have to social distance. We have to wash our material coming back from the store. And yes, it's a lot more work, but it's worth it, and when I see people in the store where they're not wearing masks, or they're not wearing it correctly, or it's not a big thing. It is a big thing, folks. And if you get infected, you will infect 3 people. Those people will infect 3 people. And within, 21 days, you infected 100 people, right? Or even more, right? So we have to do this. It's annoying. Yeah. You have to put on a mask. Like you have to wash your hands more. You have to be cognizant of touching your face. But it's a thing that is the matter of your life, and your life is in the balance, as well as the lives of others that cannot get treatment, that cannot leave their house, that are immune deficient from whatever reason that is, or elderly. And going back to what I said before, is that they're sentient human beings. They matter. So.
Thinking about what you're just talking about with masking, I feel like there's been some confusion on the general public about like what the current best practices are for keeping yourself infected, or from being infected, for keeping yourself safe,
right,
and from keeping others safe from yourself, in case you don't know that you're infected.
Right.
Can you go over what are the best practices right now for just not for somebody working in an ICU unit, but for right. Somebody just they have a 9-to-5 job where they're an essential worker at McDonald's, or they're self-quarantining at home, but you have to go to the grocery store every once in a while to get more toilet paper, because you're not gonna use Instacart for everything, and plus Instacart's on strike. So what's the best things I can do?
I I think for me is wearing, obviously these other masks are by far superior. There are other better respirators if you can get them. Even a handmade mask with a lining, you can get inserts for them, but having a mask, I think is important. I think as well is wearing your mask, and I think it's to distance for people at least 6 feet, if not longer. 6 feet is just the bare minimum, and it's over 50 years old, the 6 feet limit. There's evidence out of MIT that you need 23 to 27 feet with aerosols, and in a grocery store, that's almost impossible. I mean, it's basically impossible, and Fauci commented about that today. But I think with aerosols and stuff in the air, these things linger in the air, right? So being sure to have a mask, being sure to have, I wear glasses, so I get a little bit of eye protection. If you can wear goggles, that might be helpful because it could infect those other tissues. And then having clothes that you immediately, when you go to the store, that you take those clothes off, your shoes, everything, you put them in a thing outside to then Lysol them, or use 70% ethanol. I recommend ethanol over bleach for non-whites, because you'll change all your colors on your clothes to bleach colored white colors. So so don't do that. So otherwise you'll ruin your clothes.
If it is, but if it is bleach, use 10% bleach.
Yeah, and of course 10% bleach is preferred, and there is a contact thing here as well, right? Surfaces, you need 70% bleach, and you need to let it sit there for a bit. If you can use like hand sanitizer, this is really great. But if you can't, 70% bleach, 70% ethanol works. Usually you can go to a liquor store and you'll find Everclear. That will work. And for if you can't find anything else, you can't find hand sanitizer, you can't find anything, sometimes liquor stores will have Everclear, and you can use that. You can't use, because Everclear is 75% alcohol by volume. So that's way above the 60% limit. You can't use Tito's vodka because that's only 40%. I mean, you could dry the Tito's vodka down to get there, but you'd lose most of your vodka.
Seems like a lot of work here.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of work together, but you could do it.
I need 140 proof alcohol.
Yeah, 100. Yeah. So, and then immediately after you take your clothes off, try to get into a shower almost immediately. Hot, you could be a hot or cold shower, just a good duration, and try to soap up and try to get every orifice of yourself. And then your food, I would say at least, use 70%, use 10% bleach or 70% ethanol, and really wipe it, make sure it dries. And then for produce, ethanol and so soaking works really well, and just soak. Or if you can let it sit there for a day or two, I'd say 2 days. It's 48 hours. Most of the virus will not survive beyond that, at least based on the New England Journal of Medicine thing. Now, there's plastics; it can last a little longer. Wood and all these other things. With mail, I tend to, people have been throwing those in the microwave and stuff like that. Don't do that. We tend to quarantine our mail and leave it, and then we'll read it later in 2 days or more, because that way we know it's safe. Gloves are great, but then you have to take them on and off again. And then with hand washing, 20 seconds. So you can sing like happy birthday to yourself. It's usually about 20 seconds.
If you're familiar with the movie Dune, you can just go over that fear is the mind killer, and you get down through that whole little spiel. That is
that dates us a lot, actually, when people know what Dune is.
There's a movie coming out.
There is
a new movie coming out.
Hopefully they'll get it right this time.
We actually have that fear is the mind killer in our micro lab next to one of our hand washing sinks.
Awesome. That's awesome.
So I just want to back up. You were saying, were you saying that I should potentially soak my fruit and produce in 70% alcohol?
Well, I would say like lettuce, it's 70% alcohol. You're not going to be able to get in all the crevices.
Right.
So you can soak that in water for a good amount of time and wash it at least 3 or 4 times.
Okay. Because I'm thinking that soaking things in alcohol, this sounds like pickling. almost.
Yeah, no, and so like stuff like an apple or a mango or something like that that has like a skin you could wipe with ethanol, but something like
Okay.
lettuce would be impossible, right?
Right. Right.
So, and so when I buy like arugula at the store or lettuce, it's in a plastic container, and I can clean the plastic container, and then I put that in the fridge for 2 days, and then I assume that it's going to be okay.
Right. Or at least you're
Um,
getting it to a point where risk benefit, the risk at that point is
right.
so low that there's probably other
Potatoes, for
things.
example, stuff that have a hard skin, 70% ethanol and then a wash probably will work, but other produce, probably not.
Do you think people truly understand and believe, I think is key here too, in the idea of asymptomatic carriers and cross contamination?
So I don't know if it's really, so this is an interesting thing. So this has come up a couple of times. So and maybe it's just my training. And so they're not asymptomatic carriers, right? So when we think of asymptomatic carrier, we think of Mary Mallon, right? Typhoid Mary, right? And we think about how she had this extremely virulent form of Salmonella typhonurium, right? And she was perfectly healthy, right? And so it lived somehow in her gut. She didn't wash her hands when she prepared food. So it was a fecal oral kind of contamination, and it killed people because of this virulent form of salmonella that lived, I guess, in her gut that that somehow did not give her really horrendous symptoms to where she could continue to work. So that's when I think of an asymptomatic character. They have this organism, but they have no symptoms at all, right? Whereas with people with COVID, they have the virus. They are going through active infection. The symptoms are mild, so they don't even realize it's there. And then eventually the immune system destroys it, or it just runs out of steam. We don't know, right? We assume that there's one really brilliant paper it's very low numbers, but brilliant paper out of PNAS where they took plasma from people that recovered and they put them into severe patients, and the people that were suffering really bad got better. And so we know that there's neutralizing antibodies. We don't know how long they last, and we don't know how, because this is the new kid on the block. We don't know with this virus. It's only been around, really since December of December last year. So we don't know if this thing, okay, well, if you get sick, how long does your immunity last? If you have something like chicken pox, you get a vaccine once, you get it once and you're immune. You never have to worry about it again. Whereas with flu, there's all kinds of recombination. You have multiple different strains with 8 parts of its genome. And so it's just basically playing puzzles, and it makes a new virus, or it makes a small mutation that, changes where the immune system can't deal with it as well. We've been lucky enough that we dealt with a huge thing with swine origin, and that was actually mild. That it actually got less, there were some very virulent strains of it, but they were quarantined, but then it got less virulent as it went along, which was odd for an influenza. This one, we don't assume that it will have these massive bits of recombination. Bats, the bat reservoir, or so where the virus resides. So if you have a well and you're trying to get water, that's your reservoir. That's where all the water is. So that's what we mean in virology when we talk about reservoir. So the horseshoe bat, this particular bat, has a wide variety of these viruses. And they've been studying them since the original SARS outbreak in Wuhan and all over China, and even everywhere, right? But the people that are supposed to live near these caves where these bats are, they supposedly have antibodies to the virus and they don't get sick. So that's a good sign that potentially, or if they do get sick, it's not able to spread.
Right.
So they're not able to leave the local community. I mean, and Ebola was like this as well. Like, it never really got out of the Congo until, we got it in, when they had, this only happened twice where it had it infected, Marburg's, its cousin, with infected monkeys in Marburg, Germany, or with Ebola restin. But Ebola restin, we found out, was just a only a monkey virus, and it doesn't seem to infect humans. So we really got lucky with those two. And the last Ebola outbreak, it didn't kill as fast, and so it was able to spread, and it led to, I believe around 5,000 dead. I believe something like 3,000 to 5,000 dead. I don't remember off the top of my head. But if you're a virus that is very virulent and lethal, you really seldom leave your local area. Now, if you're a virus that has, if you're a virus that you don't have a lot of symptoms right away, and then all of a sudden you get huge symptoms, and it takes years, for example, to develop symptoms, this virus can spread very rapidly, and you don't even know until it's too late. And this is what happens with HIV, right? So HIV potentially can take years for you to know that you have it, but you have it and you're spreading it and you don't know it. But you're not asymptomatic. You're just, you have symptoms, but you just don't know it. So I guess it's a little, maybe a chicken or the egg kind of thing. But, I think when I think of asymptomatic, I think of people that they harbor it, but they have no ill effects from it at all. Whereas with people that were COVID-19, they do have symptoms, a plethora of symptoms, and there's something wrong, but they're able, but they don't progress severe, where they need respirators and these kind of things.
No, that makes sense. Like at first I'm like, oh, you're kind of being a pedant, but as you explain it, that makes complete sense. And I actually like the way you put that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
I saw a disturbing cartoon from a former coworker, who is actually a clinical microbiologist. And the punchline is in air quotes, is that this person gets ill and they're talking about how terrified they are because, there's only a 99% survival rate. And it's like, it's a really poor attempt at humor. It's really punching down to people who have, get sick and who are dying of this disease. And like you said, 60,000 people in 2 months. But thinking about the survival rate, because I have heard this before, and this is a talking point, but can you kind of maybe discuss on why focusing on what the survival rate is?
This is a great question. I'm only smiling because it's a great question.
No, that's fine.
I'm only smiling, not that it's absolutely horrendous, and I don't want to take that away, but this is a great question. So if I had a jar of jelly beans, we'll say, and they're absolutely delicious, the best jelly beans you've ever had, and I then tell you 2 of those jelly beans in that bowl of jelly beans will kill you, would you put your hand and eat the jelly beans? No one would. I mean, so
I have problems with self-control, but I understand what you're saying.
Right. So even if we look at like salmonella and E. coli outbreaks in produce, what's the first thing we do? We remove that romaine lettuce outright, even if there's a chance of death. Right? So I'm just saying and that's how I approach to people. If you're okay, and it's not even that simple as just eating the jelly beans. Not only that, the 2 jelly beans will kill you and will kill your whole family. Right? You would not take that chance. I know I would. Maybe some people would. I don't know. And
I think a good analogy to follow up with that is it's that idea of, well, but I have personal will and personal freedom, and this is my liberty to eat that jelly bean. And my thought is, well, yeah, but it's fair to that person who didn't choose the jelly bean.
Right.
Your choice is now going to kill.
Right. This is the thing. So there's individualism, and it's part of our ethos as the United States. But it's also, if it infringes on someone else's freedom, that's also against kind of that whole mantra, right? Is that by you eating that lethal jelly bean and hurting your family, that your neighbor is also, and they had no choice. And so that infringes on their freedom as well. And so I know that argument. I've heard it a million times. And so this has been my way to tackle it. It's like, look, not you, there is, 2 jelly beans out of 1,000, yeah, sure. Likely you're not going to get the lethal jelly bean, right? But if you do, you not only hurt yourself, you hurt someone else, your family directly, because you're going to be around your family and your friends, and you hurt someone over here that you don't even know.
So when I drive around, like, I go to work, not every day, but most every day. When I'm driving to and from work, driving past the park system in Minneapolis, huge extensive park system, I'm seeing lots and lots of people, usually in that 18 to 35-year-old age range, out and about, acting like there's nothing wrong. It's a gorgeous day. We're going to get outside and enjoy it. What do you tell these 20-something-year-old people who just don't think that this is serious? Like,
Yeah.
And as a parent and a healthcare
Yeah.
worker who maybe has 20-something-year-old kids who aren't taking this too seriously, this is a question I'm not asking for a friend, I'm asking for me.
Well, I have an 18-year-old myself, and the class of 2020, I graduated in 99, but 20 years later I have my daughter, and it's a thing that is, they don't have their senior prom this year. They're not going to have their, hopefully they won't walk and do their graduation, because that's a threat to everybody. My daughter also is a CNA, so she's a healthcare worker, and she deals with folks, and she doesn't go to the one unit because they don't have proper PPE. I have nursing friends and stuff like this. And, it's obviously part of, adolescence to rebel against your parents. I know I did. We all do, but this is one where it's like, people my age, people younger, there's little children that are dying from it as well. It, initially out of China, it was like, well, it's only older people, it's only the sick. And that we know is not 100% true.
Although even when it is, that's such a gross thing to hear. Like, I realize that's not the statement you're making. That's the argument that we hear from other people.
That's the argument that we hear.
And I just hear that, and it just
that's
gross
the
to think these are people. I know that. I know there's the phrase "okay, boomer," and I actually use that phrase. Like, don't get me wrong, in certain situations.
Yeah,
but like that doesn't mean
everything from that generation. It's the boomer cleanser to every other just horrendous thing. And look, these are people.
Yeah.
Like, the end of the day, these are human beings.
Yeah, and I'm hearing this from people who profess, these people, most of my, my friends and the people, my social circles are very, sure, they're very great about this, but I even hear this, quote unquote, social justice warriors like myself who are like, the idea that they're not treating their fellow humans as humans just disgusts me. And it just, we should be caring about all the lives. I don't want to say all lives matter. That just sounds terrible.
Let's not go there. Let's get back
different.
to I think let's get back to that.
So how do we make people take this seriously, who are younger and who are like, I'm going to live forever. This is never going to affect me.
Well, at least when I was an adolescent and they showed me pictures of some of the symptoms of STDs, like, I hate to scare people into doing it, and I don't want to advocate that, but like, when I was growing up, and as you as well, like, we lived through the HIV epidemic, and we didn't know who had it, but I know I did. I sure as heck wore a condom, right? Because, and some people didn't, and people are going to make, people are going to make awful decisions, and or good decisions, but it's just, look, I think in the way that you tell someone, it's like, look, yeah, you may not die from this, right? That's true. But, find their favorite person, like, who, and that's how I approach it. Who is your favorite person in your life? Who's the one that is it your mom? Is it your dad? Is it an uncle? Is it a coach? Something like that. And they'll say, oh, it's, Coach Robbins or something, right? And he's my football coach or whatever. Well, how would your life be if he wasn't there anymore? Would you want that? And the answer I get is like, absolutely not. No way. Well, you're putting on that mask to not only protect yourself, but to protect Coach Robbins or one of his family members, you know? And so think of that, right? That's someone that has helped you and become a better person, or is your buddy, your best friend, or that someone will say is my best friend. How would it be without them if they weren't there tomorrow? And most of them will say, I can't even think about that. That won't happen. Well, think of it this way. If you love them enough to have them be in your life, you can love them enough to wear a mask or to wash your hands.
You know, as you're talking, something that comes to mind is the idea that many people, I don't want to overgeneralize, some people under 20 have, and I know I probably felt the exact same way, that I'm somehow better than previous generations and I'm not going to repeat their mistakes. And as I hear somebody who's maybe 15 to 25 say, the boomers destroyed this country, the Generation Xers destroyed this country, they've made bad choices. But if they're choosing to not do anything to limit the spread of this pandemic, they're making a different choice, but they're making that same bad choice. They're making the same choice that they're going to be judged on by the people, you know, that are born, you know, the quarantini babies that are born in 10 years, you know. Like,
right. I mean, this thing is, you know, it's, I don't know if Game of Thrones fans here, it's like the Night King, right? It doesn't talk, it just kills. That's all it does. That's all it knows how to do is kill. You know, it's designed to replicate, and it kills us by accident. A perfect, you know, some viruses, you know, part of our own virome. Like there's viruses that can protect you, like human Peggy-virus G, this correlation that says it can prevent progression of symptoms in HIV. Like there's a phage that if you have it, it can protect you from non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So, you know, but this one, if it gets into humans, there's a small chance that you will die from it. And then there's also the chance that if you don't die from it, you can kill someone else by carrying it and not knowing that you have it. So, and this was the same thing we dealt with in the 80s and the 90s with HIV, right? This is an you know, it's a droplet pathogen that is passed through sneezing and coughing. So you know, it's Schrodinger's virus. We both know we have it and don't have it, and we have a test and don't have a test. And so we are basically Schrodinger's cat, and, you know, we're both alive and dead at the same time. And so if it's as simple as washing your hands, cleaning your stuff, being extra cautious not to touch your face and wear a mask, I think it's worth it to help save your life, because you don't know, like, you know, even, you know, we don't know, like, if we have some sort of condition that we don't know about, right? You know, but I think, you know, we have to make the choice of preventing further loss.
You mentioned testing there for a moment, and I'm wondering, as we've seen an increase in testing, we're also seeing an increase in the number of positive cases. Can you go over how we determine what the rate of new infections are that are actually really new infections compared to just learning about people who, you know, there were already people infected and like, am I making sense? Like,
yeah,
what are the new cases versus like what the background cases already were?
So the main two tests are from Thermo Fisher and Roche, and so these are quantitative PCRs. So they isolate nucleic acids, RNA, because the virus is an RNA virus, and so it never forms DNA. It's always is RNA, and they are the largest RNA life forms, coronaviruses. They're 29 to 31 kb in length. They're the largest form of RNA life in our ecosystem. So that is cool. I wish they weren't killing us, but cool viruses, you know. So yeah, and so they isolate RNA, and then they do a high throughput PCR assay, and they quantitatively measure it over a certain amount of time and threshold, basically an abundance number, and that abundance number tells you whether you're positive or negative. And then there's, of course, false positives, false negatives. So false positive says we think you have it, but it's not really there. False negative is like, well, we don't think you have it because we didn't detect anything, but you still have it. It may be asymptomatic. And this can all be, and so they sample it with a very large Q-tip, and they go in the back of the nose, and they get back in there, and they sample it. And then they take that swab and they put it in solution, and then they extract nucleic acids and do a test. And so the thought is that if you've had 2 tests within a certain amount of time, I don't know this right off the top, and I have friends who are clinicians that should tell me this, but at least, for me, if you have one in the beginning and you're positive, and then you have 14 days and you have another one that you're negative, and then you do another 14 days and you're negative, you have recovered. The antibody tests, all they tell us currently is that you've been exposed and you have antigen. So you have antibodies that are interacting with a protein that is from the virus. So you do these things on ELISA or some sort of other assay. And so you basically coat a plate with protein from the virus, and then you take serum and you isolate antibodies from the serum, and then they stick onto that protein like this. And then if they stick, and then we use some sort of assay for that antibody to light it up, and that says, hey, you have that presence of that antibody. And that means you have been infected in some form or another, or you've been exposed. We don't know if you're immune. We don't know the quality of that antibody. And so neutralizing antibodies basically say, okay, well, that antibody sticks to something important on the virus, say the coat protein, and blocks it from entering, and so then you can't get infected. And so and then we hear a lot about herd immunity. Norway is going with this idea, or Sweden, sorry, not Norway. Sorry, Norway. With Sweden, they've taken approaches like make your best approach, right? And they've gone with this kind of idea of just letting people get infected, and then it will go through the population, and then there'll be enough immunity in their population to eventually you won't have any more spread of cases, right? So and this is my professional opinion, this is a strategy that basically says, well, we don't want to do anything that might hurt any economy. We don't want to do anything that would, mess with people's lives. And so we're going to go with this approach. And so they have the highest amount of people that are dying from it from active cases, to around 10%, if I remember last time. So we don't know if you can gain long-term herd immunity with these viruses. If this was something like a chickenpox or herpes, I'd say, yeah, probably would. But we don't know enough about the immunology of this virus, or these viruses in general, because we know that you can get potentially the same coronavirus cold, a year later, right? So I am more on the model of, test robustly, track those cases, quarantine those people, and it's worked in those 3 countries. I mean, they're much smaller. They're not on the scale of the United States, but if we go with the model of just let's open everything up, and we don't want the economy to hurt, and I understand that people need to work and people need to make money, and we don't want small businesses to close. Like, I understand all that. But think of 10% of Americans dying, or even 5%. Is that a number, worth it? I don't think it is. I think that there's great news that I read a paper in Nature today about vaccines that are coming. We might have one that comes very soon. Again, we don't know if with that vaccine, whether it's just a quick fix, whether it's like a 6-month thing and you have to do it another 6 months. I think, I don't think these things will become seasonal. There's been models about if they would become seasonal. My thought is that things become seasonal because they usually go on with migration of birds. And so flu, some of the coronaviruses that infect us potentially come in on birds. And so there is some seasonality to that because birds travel, right? These bats are mainly in China. We are continually encroaching on their territory. We're continually going into areas of the world that we're burning down forests, and we're chopping down and expanding these type of things. And so we will bump into other things, right? and we need to be prepared for one that is more lethal. This virus is not as lethal as some of the ones that I've studied in graduate school, and some of the ones that I keep me up at night, like measles-like viruses, for example, Lepidendra, right? Those have much higher R naughts, about 5, 10, right, versus 3 or 2, right? And they're airborne. There's been an outbreak of Nipah virus in Kerala in India, and it was devastating. There are other viruses out there that are, and other pathogens that we have no idea, that are by potentially far more deadly. And so it's unfortunate this many people have died, but I think it wakes us up to be like, this is a thing, and we need to make real changes in our infrastructure, our medical staff. And, I'm biased, but I think science, technology, and engineering, you invest broadly and you will find answers. I mean, NASA at one point during the space race had 11% of the federal budget. And this conversation we're having is due to technology that was developed in that. My cell phone here, right, developed. So when you invest broadly in science, you will gain new technologies and you will gain new information, right? If we had invested, $10 billion in researching of these things, we would have maybe had a vaccine for SARS viruses in general. And beyond just like it needs to make money. If it doesn't make money, it's not worth the value. I don't buy that. I think initially with the structure of DNA, it didn't have any value, right? But it took another 20 years to be able to, discover new things of the human genome and unravel mysteries of the natural universe, of the natural world. So,
yeah, I'm a diabetic, and if it wasn't for DNA PCR replication that we got through understanding what DNA is, there wouldn't be synthetic insulin for me to inject.
right.
So, yeah, science. Thinking of science, you deal with a lot of quack pseudoscience. I don't know if you've seen like that coronavirus virus is supposedly caused by 5G cell towers,
Oh,
or
yeah. That's a good one.
things like that, or the Bill Gates. This was created by Bill Gates so he could vaccinate people and implant the mark of the beast in them or something.
Yeah, whatever.
But other than like Lysol nebulizers and UV enemas, what conspiracy theory or quack remedy has struck you as being the most ridiculous, dangerous, or just the most memorable?
Well, I have a top 10 list, and I'm going to put this out on my YouTube channel pretty soon because I'm amazed by some of them. Like some of them are just absolutely. And so if you give me a minute, I will look this up because I sent it to my friend, and we were just all at first laughed, and then second we're like almost on the point of just.
Yeah, this is one of those reasons why I am such a huge fan of like Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson and scientific skepticism in general.
Hopefully there's not like a huge issue with okay. Let me see. Just stuff on my page, things are melting. Help us.
Yes.
Let's see. I had a top 10 here, and it was just marvelous. And I'm probably not. Here we go. So, my favorite that just can't seem to die is this idea of eating bats. That's the one that is just so absurd that I can't. Okay, so first of all, I've been to China multiple times. It's a wonderful, beautiful, ancient country that has kept the ancient with the modern. I'm not going to talk about its government. I'm going to talk about its people, and I'm going to talk about my friends that are there, and a people are not its government. So I wanted to say that. And a lot of my friends in Europe, I tell them that, them looking at us. So I will say, the idea that this was done by eating bats, and initially I fell into this as well, is absolutely absurd. First of all, they don't eat a lot of bats in Wuhan and areas like that. People in Palau actually make a soup from bats, right? And it's a huge part of their culture. So there isn't a lot of bat eating in general. And we don't really know, what was the thing in the middle. So it was originally thought this idea of a bat, and then it got jumped into a pangolin, and then the pangolin virus jumped to human. The virus in pangolin is only like 91% similar to the one to COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2. And the one out of the bat virus, what is it, RA3TC or something like that, it's only 96%. So we don't have what we had in SARS-1, where we had the organism, that this thing, the mixing host, right? So the civet, right? So we had a person that was, in China, it's part of their, culture and part of their things to, raise and wild animals to, for the migrant folks in China. And it was just part of an industry, right? And I think in general, we need to basically remove the wildlife capture and smuggling. And then as well, we need to also change our own production food line as well, because swine origin came out of, factory farming. So we need to take a really deep look on how we deal with animals, because all these things are zoonotic. They come from animals. They don't come from any other thing else, right? So the eating bats, and so that's absolutely absurd. And then the idea that, and even it wouldn't be from eating a bat, it would be, even if it was in the bat, it would be from butchering the bat, or butchering, in the case of HIV-1. The other one with HIV-1 is it was having sexual intercourse with monkeys. That's the other one that just never seems to die. And that is absolutely, again, absurd. And it is from butchering the animal. So when you're cutting up an animal and there's blood and mucus, and you're aerosolizing these things, and that's where you get sick. So that's the one for me, the two that never die. The first one with, the first one, and then the second one is that you don't get it from eating bats, you get it from butchering animals. I think that was one of them. That's like my number one, that it just doesn't seem to die. The other one is that is, I guess, is that other things are more deadly. Swine origin was more deadly. That, again, is absolutely, completely absurd and not true. The other one that I get that is more scientific and it's not going around as much, I even saw it on the Netflix special, that this came from snakes. That was the other one. That was earlier in the pandemic, is that this thing came from snakes. That is also absolutely absurd. These things, and I read this paper. It is horrible. I don't know how it got through peer review. Not all of them are good. That's how peer review corrects itself. So even if it's peer reviewed, be skeptical. It can be wrong. Okay, people get it wrong. Okay, and that's where it gets out into the public and people can understand it. So the analysis, it was not very good, and there's no evidence that these viruses infect reptiles. There's just none. They infect birds. They infect mammals. That's their main go-to. Now, could they exist in a lower life form? Absolutely. Like could they exist in something like insects or something like that, in the guts of insects? Absolutely. We don't know though, right? And you have to. And so I'll go back to Richard Feynman, and he said, for extraordinary claims, you need extraordinary evidence. Yeah. and so this is one that it's dead now, but I even saw in the Netflix special they saying, both snakes and fish, and that is absolutely, utterly absurd. I mean, there's other one I think that is most ridiculous I saw lately, is that it's not a virus at all. It's an exosome. And so for those who know what an exosome is, these are little invaginations of cells that carry everything from nucleic acids to proteins, and that these are man-made exosomes that people are spreading around and stuff like this. And they're, and for me, it's just absolutely preposterous. And I'm like, wow, so we've been able to make self-replicating exosomes. Like, that would be a huge deal for nanomedicine, right?
Well, that one actually is logically consistent with the idea that cancer is, created by big pharma and they're just holding the cure for us, because exosomes would go a long way to curing cancer if we
Right.
understood that technology.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
at least it's a logically consistent conspiracy theory.
Yeah, the other one I see is like they have like a picture of a vial of a virus. That's the other one I saw that is just absolutely absurd. And so they're holding it, and it says right on the thing, canine coronavirus vaccine, and they're hiding it from you and all this stuff. And first of all, that's for I don't know if people know what canines are, and they're dogs, okay? And so they're not people. That's the first part of this that just falls apart. And then second of all, it it's for a dog. Like, I mean, and it's not this thing, and it's not. I don't understand. It's just.
I feel like that's
collision.
a fundamental misunderstanding of how complicated biology is, and
Yeah.
how there's vast differences between canine biochemistry and human biochemistry.
Right.
That, we're both using molecules and we're both having biochemical reactions,
Right.
but they are different biochemical reactions in many instances. Many of them are the same, but there's some key differences that are very, very key.
Yeah, I mean, and it just goes back to my original thing that we talked about originally in this, is that it is literacy, basic scientific literacy, and so we have failed as educators and as scientists. We have failed these people, and that's where I take responsibility for that, because I'm a scientist. I work every day. I try to progress science, but I have to be a better scientific communicator. And I have to be able to kill the pseudoscience. And it's not a new thing. I mean, if you look at Pasteur, he fought spontaneous generation, this idea that, things just magically, spontaneously appear, right? And that was utter nonsense, and he proved it wrong. I mean, the idea with Lister, he fought the idea of like the guy, going back to the Old West kind of analogy, the guy who was the shoe guy, and the dentist and the butcher was all the same guy, right? And so in childbirth, they would come in with dirty hands, and they would give they would help give birth, and they would die because they got infections, right? So all it took was them washing their hands, right? This was Lister's big, and then there was Hillman, who said that vaccines matter and we need to make vaccines in order to at a mass scale.
Right.
And basically funded the kind of modern vaccine, what we think with Merck and these kind of things. So, it's not a new thing. It's an old thing kind of reshaped and militarized in a form that can touch everybody on the planet within a matter of minutes. But I think there's a lot of them out there. There's so many just horrendous thing. But I think it's the main creme de la creme is that it's not a hoax.
Right.
And it's real. People are dying.
Something that I thought was interesting and shows how different groups of people have different biases was, I see people in the US, especially from certain political leanings, talk about, well, this is a biochemical weapon created in China. And that's people in the US that will say that. But I've heard anecdotally, there are many people in Iran who is suffering, tremendously, who are talking about this is a biochemical weapon created by the US.
Right.
And it's like, different cultures, different societies, but let's back away from the conspiracy thinking and let's focus on the science.
It's easy to say it's not your fault.
Yeah, and I think
it's scapegoating. It's easy to say it's this guy over here.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all that is.
It's blame the devil.
And China has even said that it could have originated in the United States. I mean, that's the other one I get. Yeah. The other one I get is, the other one I see a lot is it's a Chinese virus. It's a Chinese virus, just like HIV was a gay virus. Right.
And the Spanish flu was a Spanish virus.
Was a Spanish virus. And we know for sure that, it wasn't, it was just, they didn't, it was some political thing like that. And that likely that that it originated in China and then moved into Europe and then spread around. But the first confirmed case was in Kansas, of all places. So,
right.
So, but it's still foggy on like the origin of 1918 flu. So The one I get is it's a Chinese virus. And so it is not. So first of all, I don't know if you know this about viruses, but they have no nationality and they have no country of origin, really, at the end of the day. They may have originated in a particular area, but, they are probably elsewhere. And they have no loyalty to any religion or any race or creed or whatever. All they care about is replication. That's it. So it is not. It is a. I would say it is definitely a bat virus for sure. We know that it originated in bats, and so it's a bat virus. It's not a Chinese virus; it's a bat virus. So yeah, but even then, it's a virus. It replicates. Just like HIV. It came from monkeys. It's a monkey virus. There's zoonotic viruses, right? But it's just this. It's just this. 20 years later, it's a new thing, right? With HIV, it was this. With this, it's something else, right? But the idea is it doesn't matter, right? And that we need to work together, as a team to defeat it. That's, we need to, and going back to the Game of Thrones analogy, the North and the South and all the Riverlands have to combine the force to defeat the Night King, right? We can't just all fight it individually. We will lose, right?
I've never actually seen Game of Thrones. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's great show.
But
show.
I have heard that it's a fantastic show, and I will eventually watch it. I mean, I'll be rooting for Sean Bean the entire series. I know I'll lose my head over that. So, I've seen this. People ask this on your page, and I've seen this in other public spaces too. And it's people who talk about they profess that they were really sick back in December, early January.
Right.
They know that they had SARS-CoV-2 and an infection they had a COVID infection, despite having no direct contact with anyone overseas, no travel, and it feels to me unlikely that COVID-19 was circulating in the United States in late December. But I'm interested in hearing your opinion on that.
Yeah. No. So we only had the very first cases, the first ones that they would let us know in November, late December. A lot of them going back to the Wuhan market, potentially. No, you did not have it in November. You did not have this in late December. You may have had it maybe late December, but not early December. The first confirmed case was in Seattle, next to kind of 8 hours from where I'm at. And that was on the 20th. The first communal case, when someone, they didn't get it they didn't travel anywhere and they got it somehow other way, was in California. And that was on February 6th. So going back, even if the first case was on the 20th, so maybe New Year's, okay? Maybe if you were sick on New Year's, I don't know. But beyond that, these are acute viruses. They don't sit around. They're not latent. They don't hang around in the immune system or the neural system, as far as we know. New data will come, and they'll use this video against me probably. So, but science is an ever evolving thing, and things change. So what I would say now may change in 6 weeks.
No, that's fair.
Right. And so go ahead.
No, I was just going to follow up with somebody close to me was asking about treatments and whatnot. And they were asking okay, well, to them, the effects of this disease is very similar to cystic fibrosis. And I don't know that that's the case or not, just as far as fluid buildup in the lungs. But do you know if there's any similarities in treatment for what we do for cystic fibrosis patients versus what we do for patients going through this? Or is that outside the scope of your practice? In
end stages, I would say that they're on ventilators and stuff like that. But cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease. It's a single point mutation in the human genome that then allows for more mucin building in the lung, and then you get a polymicrobial infection that is biofilm of Pseudomonas as the main part of the biofilm. And eventually it overgrows and they can't breathe, right? And so they use a lot of kind of mucin suppressors, some also immune suppressors, these kind of things. I'm not an expert in cystic fibrosis, but in the end part, when they are needing oxygen, yes, that treatment would be the same as in the end parts of COVID.
I was because they were curious. I was like, I actually don't know the answer to that, so I should probably ask somebody. Um, so I guess now that you've created an online space for what can be a very contentious topic, unfortunately, do you have any advice for others who are trying to share their expertise in whatever their niche topic is, like in a public setting?
I think, if it's like astrophysics or mathematics or whatever you're doing, I think sharing that information, I think, is incredibly important, and maintaining the idea of only the peer-reviewed or preprint, and then taking some time to actually say and answer people. Right now, we have a lot of people on the page now because they're just worried about COVID, but I'm hoping that they'll stay and learn about other things. And so I think, because eventually this thing will go away, it will change our lives irreparably. But I think, having scientists think about beyond just the lab, beyond just the computer, beyond just writing papers, beyond just going after grants, but actually going out and doing outreach to your local communities, going to grade schools, high schools, these kind of things, giving lectures, I think is really important. And I think people are really interested in science. I think people are really interested in facts. I don't think it's to the point of where people are not interested in facts and these kind of things. I think that is still there, thankfully. That is not, we're not, 500 years ago, they used to burn scientists at the stake. So we're not there anymore. So we've made some progress. Giordano Bruno was burnt at the stake for his belief in the heliocentric model, right? So we're not there yet, thank
Right.
whatever. But, so we've come a long way. So I think that, share if you're a professional scientist, an MD, those kind of things, be cognizant of what you share because it will go everywhere, but also be a good citizen and try to be able to, and this goes back to the 80s and 90s, like when we talked about the ozone, right? And scientists said, hey, the ozone's a problem, we got to get rid of CFCs. They used to listen to us. Policymakers used to listen. And now they have silenced us. And that is a thing of great concern. Because if a society who doesn't believe its scientists and engineers and mathematicians is a society that doesn't exist very long. So, yeah. So I think it's just like, get the right information out there, have groups of people communicating, and we can do a lot. And I think we have to have a grassroots movement to eliminate not only this virus and a community thing to assimilate this virus, but to eliminate its even more sinister cousin, and that is misinformation.
So where can listeners and viewers, since this will be on YouTube,
Yeah.
where can people go to experience your work, ask more questions, and get more
Right.
answers?
So we have our public Facebook group, Your Friendly Neighborhood Virologist. You can add that tonight. I'm also going to have a YouTube channel. This will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel. As well, if you're interested in employment or science in general, I have a startup company, Raw Molecular Systems, LLC, and it's rawmolecularsystems.com. You can go there. And then, of course, you can Google my name or GitHub page in order to contact me directly. So I'm always enthusiastic and a cheerleader for science in general and math and engineering. And if this is interesting to you or anyone and you want to be involved, I'm all ears. And so I'm here to stop. I'm trying to leave this pale blue dot better than I found it.
It's the Girl Scout motto too, and I'm a big fan. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. I was really happy that you were able to come on and to share your expertise. And like I said, we've chatted about COVID-19 in the past, but so much has changed, and I see in a good way in that we've learned so much. And
Right.
I appreciate you sharing that with us.